So welcome, Tracy Mathewson, filmmaker, soon to be Dr. Mathewson. We're really delighted to have you today. And we're going to ask you to tell us a bit about yourself and also your wonderful film, California.
Great. So I'm Tracy Mathewson. I'm a writer-director originally from California, and I'm in the very closing stages of my PhD, which investigates representations of justice in American conspiracy film and also female agency and how female agency affects justice within those narratives.
Brilliant. And it's focused on practice, which is a cutting edge field. And can you tell us a bit how that works and what it involves?
Definitely, yeah. So the thesis is done by creative practice. So as I was undertaking my research on the films and the genre, I was then kind of developing techniques to address this question of depleted justice over time. And then through my own work, I wrote a short film and then a feature film, which would stress test, experiment, and kind of expand on those techniques to see if what I was proposing was actually answering and addressing the problems that I was kind of discovering in my research. So it was kind of a really nice dialogue back and forth with the research and then analyzing it, assessing, and then creating anew.
Fantastic. So we'd love to hear about all those projects, but the one that we're going to focus on today is a short film called California. Now, I know this film because in my capacity as director of Rock's Film Festivals, and it came to me in our Los Angeles edition, and it won Best Drama. It was Best Drama. It won Best
Drama for Brighton, where we're
absolutely, yes. Best Drama for Brighton. Great. And also Brighton Rocks Film Festival, which is taking place at 23rd, 25th of July. So our jurors and reviewers were just blown away when we saw your film. It just really made that impact, has a kind of immediate engagement and substance too, and emotion. So can you tell us just what the film's about and how it all came about?
Yeah, so the film is, I would refer to it as like a memory which is kind of packaged by these bookends. It's about a young woman who is English. She's living in LA, and this memory that she kind of has to process before she decides to call her father on Christmas is a phone call from about 6 months prior, which really fractured their relationship. It is what some festivals have referred to as a quiet film. It's not like the usual kind of short film, which is particularly witty or flash bang. It's much more kind of contemplative and about family. So the idea was actually the seed of California was kind of sown about 10 years ago when I was undertaking my master's in screenwriting. And I was talking to my then supervisor, Chris Fallon, about how I would spend time with my dad. Being an American in London and my dad was in California, we would have, my dinner, his breakfast over Skype. And that's how we would kind of catch up. And Chris was like, Tracy, that's so wonderful. You should make a short out of it. And I was like, no, that's too boring. And I just completely rejected it until, years and years later, when I kind of underwent a similar experience that Calli, the protagonist, does in the film, and was kind of processing it in my own way. And I came back from California and did what many artists do with their trauma, and they created art out of it. And so the script just kind of tumbled out of me and then was refined. And then we were finally able to go into production in July of last year.
Fantastic. So this trauma and at the core of the conflict in the film, so to speak, is a revelation in this conversation that her father in England, so it's the inverse of your situation, has kind of squandered her inheritance. He's kind of lost their house, which he was expecting to help her get that foot on the ladder. And there she is in Los Angeles, working in In-N-Out Burger. Not quite McDonald's, just pretty much the same. And so this kind of drip revelation, unfolds, and the kind of we really sense her trauma, what it means for her future. Is that basically an apt description? And is this kind of millennial fiction? So are baby boomers the new bad boys? And
well, yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think that reading of the story acknowledges the impact of the father's decision on her future, which, as many millennials will relate to in this kind of economic climate, that the only way to own property, which is really deemed as this sense of security and success, is through bequeathed, financial support. But there's a second reading of California, which I think to me actually is the more important and the more poignant for me, which is this kind of past reading and how this decision of Calli's father affects her memories of her past and how she perceives her childhood. And that was really the most shocking thing for me, was thinking that I grew up in one socioeconomic strata only to find out that this wasn't a situation which was out of my father's control. It was absolutely in his control, and it was a decision that was made on a daily basis for years. And I think that's kind of much more crushing, like we're told we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, if maybe I can one day buy myself a house without the help of my parents, but I can't get back those memories. I can't change them. And they feel kind of broken. So yes, there's absolutely a generational divide between Calli and her father, David. But I think, I don't know. Yeah, what's more hurtful is those broken memories rather than kind of moving on from it.
You explained that extremely well, and that gives us an insight into the depth and sophistication of the film. There's not just a this or just a that.
Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was definitely hard trying to portray it. Both characters who are selfish, because the first reading of Calli is like, oh, you're so entitled, and it's something that my father told to me, you're so entitled. You thought that you would have this, but there's much more, much more deeper there. And there's a depth even to David, he didn't want the house, but he was, given it in his own way. And so, yeah, there's a lot of complexity there, which hopefully I think the short kind of presents in a way that audiences can draw and connect with what they feel to it as well.
Yeah, no, it really does. But just on this subject of millennials versus boomers, I mean, is that wrong for millennials to start feeling angry and to express that? I personally see it a lot more in films, and I find it rather interesting. For instance, in Los Angeles, we got a film called The Revolution Generation, which is a real kind of like manifesto for millennial anger at all the woes that have, been done to us.
Yeah, I feel like we've definitely drawn the short straw, and there's plenty of empirical evidence for the kind of situation that millennials are in. So this kind of angst and this anger and the shaking of the fist is certainly warranted. But I don't know if we should be targeting boomers. Like they're all going to be retiring soon, and they're all dying soon, and I think my position is I don't want to be angry, and I don't think that boomers are in a position to be solving the problems that they may have saddled us with, our anger that this has happened. Maybe in the similar way of Calli, like she may be so angry and frustrated with her dad for creating this problem. Oh my God, it's a metaphor. But who is really going to solve this problem? You know, she's going to have to make her life, you know, out of this chasm that's been left there. He can't fix it. He's not going to be able to all of a sudden magic up this mortgage for the house. And I think in the same way, boomers aren't going to be able to solve the crises that have befallen millennials on their own. So it seems natural to blame them, but I don't think it's a productive thing to do. You know, we can express those angst, but we can't expect boomers to fix it for us now.
That's very well said. Perhaps let's just pity them.
Yeah.
It's far more the better revenge. Great. Just going back still to the kind of construction of your film and this, I mean, it's almost, I'd say, a perfect dialogue and the way it unfolds. So can you give us any 101 pointers to how to write that?
So in terms of dialogue or in terms of the actual construction?
Yeah, both.
So dialogue, I mean, I must confess, a lot of it is verbatim. The middle section, Act 2, that is really drawn from not just one conversation, but a few conversations that I had with my father. But so I think if I were to kind of reproduce that or to apply it to other work, is always listening, you know, and remembering. And I think it is like a really almost sadistic quality of artists to be able to, while you're experiencing something traumatic, to then also be kind of taking it down and remembering it in a way that you can reproduce it later. It's a bit sick, but it makes for a tremendous amount of authenticity, which I think is what California has, you know. And yeah, and I guess just thinking of, wow, something interesting is that we recognize characters not based on necessarily what they do, but how they react, you know. So when David, the father, tells Calli, I'm depressed, you know, and this is the first time he's ever uttered those words to his daughter, what does she say? She says, I know, you know, and this is true. This was, you know, what I said to him. And it was just like, great, I'm glad you've come here. And that shows their relationship, that he's not really the father figure in this, you know, that she's the parental figure and she's the one that is kind of caring for him. And you can display those relationships through the way that people react to those bombs, you know, that are dropped.
Oh, great. No, just brilliant and authentic is the key word, I guess. And write about what you know.
It's hard. Yeah, I found California is the most personal story I've produced and probably written, and it's very scary and very hard. But yeah, the response has been comforting, but it was really scary to make and really scary to put out because it is so personal.
Yeah, understood. So it's a UK-US production, and although I'm curious to know whether it was actually shot in California, you can tell us if you like. But what I'm interested in is kind of the nature of transnational productions. We're seeing more and more, especially US, European productions. And what's the kind of dynamics of getting that right? I mean, from a cynical point of view, from the big producers, Netflix, etc., they're just looking at markets, right? Mm. So what is the art to making a transnational drama that is really, again, authentic?
Yeah, do you know, it's so interesting because I didn't really realize, I guess when you are kind of transnational, I've lived in the UK going on, in September, I'll start my 13th year living in the UK. So I almost take that for granted that there's a blending of accents or there's this transnational element. But so I think in terms of making that work from a story perspective, it's getting easier, you know, because we're having these blended lifestyles, because before the pandemic, we were so readily traveling and moving around. my kind of reason for making it, well, I don't know. I kind of had to use transnationalism as a means of kind of just separating myself from that memory. I felt it would be too much if I made her an American girl in London, but I also really loved drawing out the themes of what Los Angeles means, actually. So maybe the story needs to, obviously needs to be universal, and there are many universal themes if we're talking about stories. But I think also finding things which are kind of interesting to both worlds that you're presenting, whether it's this fascination with like the big dream, the American dream from this kind of English side, and then getting there and this crushing realization that it's false, or that kind of this very down-to-earth kind of home feeling of Newcastle or, up north. My first experience of England was living in North Yorkshire. So like, that's my own kind of like nostalgia for the north of England being placed there. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more common. And I realized once you kind of brought up transnationalism, I was like, oh, actually, another short that I wrote and the feature that I just wrote all have like immigrants, in these worlds. And it's a really interesting identity, the immigrant identity in narratives. And I actually don't think we see enough. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're going to draw on all your experiences to just keep, making these mini masterpieces. And I personally want to see them. But would you agree with me that there's a lot of criticism to be made of basically films that aim for the universal? Isn't that somehow the problem, like in Hollywood and also series that basically are international, but somehow they become very reductive about cultures?
It's definitely a really interesting point and super valid.
And can anything be done to?
It's so interesting because, we're humans, love, anger, betrayal, trust. These are universal themes, and I think maybe the power of these transnational stories is placing a character who is unfamiliar or placing a familiar character in an unfamiliar location or vice versa, and allowing both cultures to be in dialogue. Like the UK, the US, they're different, but not drastically so. I think it would be more interesting. I was actually at a conference a week or 2 weeks ago, and we had an amazing presentation about this woman on language in the Middle East and how they have their universal language, which is what Disney cartoons and Disney movies are put in, but then they also have the local dialects and the differentiation between stories which are told versus in Egypt or Iraq in those kind of regional dialects versus the universal. And I think that kind of goes to your point, where if you told a regional story with the universal dialect, you're actually missing out on that flavor, that personality, that authenticity. So my maybe response or suggestion was, let's have more of those kind of regional stories. And if maybe one person doesn't understand a word or two, that's okay, because that's actually opening up our horizon and there's an opportunity to learn from there. I actually had some American friends who couldn't understand Sophie.
Yeah.
And they were like, what? And I was like, oh, just watch it again. It's fine.
Subtitles.
I think universal themes, but with kind of more distinct characters, stories, experiences to broaden our horizons would be good.
Great. Brilliant. So perhaps a segue to another kind of angle on the film and your work, which is female agency. And we don't have to be too academic about this, but essentially California is a story of a young woman, and she has been dumbed down in many ways by a man. But is that what agency is, or is there something obviously perhaps a bit more complex about the situation? And
so with regards to my research, I'm specifically looking at female agency and its ability to impact justice. So I guess in the frame of California, Calli doesn't quite get justice, but her agency, and I would define agency as an individual's ability to create change or create choice within a social system, and those constraints on that individual, whether they be this culturally approved rhetoric of femininity, of wifedom, of motherhood. Those are these constraints which impact on female agency in particular. So for her, ideally, she's like a contemporary female character. Hopefully her agency isn't really being impacted on by these kind of external sexist forces. Yes, her kind of future is impacted on by the choices of her father. But, hopefully she'll be able to kind of sort her life out. But yeah, it's interesting. I find a lot of representations of femininity on screen are often a reaction to those constraints. We have to define ourselves against one thing or the other. So although, yeah, her particular agency wasn't such a focus for me when I was kind of writing the film, it is about a choice, and her choice to reach out and talk to her father, and which, yeah, she does.
Yeah, great. Perhaps on a more broader topic, I mean, what do you think of the current direction in terms of like Me Too themed dramas? A lot of narratives are being reworked so that, we now have the female cops and the female villains and, all the Me Too narratives in Hollywood and in British productions, European. Is this generally a good, the right way forwards? And is there any criticism?
Yeah, I think it's nice that you pointed out that we have female cops and also villains, because that's something that I kind of draw attention to in my work, is that we want to see people who are alike and unlike us on both sides of this issue. So baddies who are women and also goodies who are women, because often there was a trend, maybe, maybe it finished 3 or so years ago, which was strong female characters. We need strong female characters. And actually, strong male characters are really boring. That's like Superman, that's like one-dimensional, all good, no substance, no complexity. And then kind of around the time Jessica Jones, that television show, came out, we were starting to see like bad, complex, flawed female characters. And that's abundantly more interesting. And I think it's nice to have different, variations. You wouldn't, if you went into a movie and there was only like one guy character, you would notice it. Right. But for decades, there would be one woman in a film, and it was normal, and so there was so much pressure on this singular character to be all these, qualities. And that if that one female character was bad, you'd be like, oh, what? So all women have to be bad, But if we have an abundance of characters, then we're not putting the pressure on those characters to be these like, representatives for all the qualities. So I think we're heading in the right direction. And it's great to kind of expand, not just for women, but for queer characters, for, trans characters, and also characters who are not white. I think we should be really just opening up the floodgates for who we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Arguably, The Wizard of Oz was the last great feminist movie made until recent times. But that's it. Perhaps there must be a space for vulnerability still, and character flaw, and all these things. That's extremely perceptive. So we're kind of towards the end of our time allocation, but perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your future plans and how you see your future.
It's bright. I hope so. So by the time this interview is up at the conference, I will know how many corrections I have on my PhD. And at this point, I'm really excited to kind of put my kind of academic work on the shelf and really kind of come back into the industry, which was something I really sidelined to focus on my studies. But yeah, I'm working on quite a few creative projects between shorts and even some really exciting television things that I'm writing on with some collaborators and on my own. And I'm just hoping to get stuck in and do some more work.
Fantastic. And is the industry appreciative and more so of researchers, perhaps than in the past? Would you have any thought on that?
I don't know. I think I'm very new to that, the club of researching. I hope that it is. I hope that it will be more receptive. I think it's quite a small club of us, yourself included, who have one foot in the industry and one foot in the academic world. But I think that they can respond and help each other. I mean, a lot of the questions I was asking myself as a filmmaker 4 or 5 years ago, I've now answered through my research in my PhD, which I didn't really realize until I got to the end of it. And I was like, oh my God, actually, why I was struggling with this script is, an answer that I've come across. And so I think there should be a dialogue. And I think, I'm not saying every filmmaker needs to go and get a PhD, but I think that certain things that we may have learned or we may have researched are applicable to the wider industry and would be nice if those things were taken on board. So
I think every filmmaker should have a PhD. But anyway, to be continued. Tracy Mathewson, soon to be Dr. Tracy Mathewson, thank you for your time. We're going to watch California now, and then Tracy will be on standby afterwards to answer any questions you have. So thanks so much.
Enjoy.